like to welcome you all to the Saudi Arabian presentation and portion of LAGCO. My name is Jesse LaPierre. I'm the commercial consul at the U.S. Consulate in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. I see some esteemed guests from Saudi Aramco. I'd like to welcome them. Thank you for coming. We have some of our delegation members, too, around the room. And from the Saudi delegation, I'd encourage anybody who's interested in doing business in Saudi Arabia to take a look at our brochures in the back of the room. We have Saudi brochures with the delegation members, names, pictures, photos, business lines that they're interested in working in, and partners that they're looking for. So I would really suggest that as a great resource for everyone to take a look at. So let me start and introduce the members of my panel. I'm Jesse LaPierre. This is Mr. Scott East. Scott East is the general manager for the Weatherford Weatherford JV with Al Rashaid. And next to him, on his right, is Ishtiaq Hussain, who is my senior commercial specialist. He's been covering the oil and gas industry in Saudi Arabia for the consulate for 14 years now. Is that correct? MashaAllah. So I'm glad to see the folks here are so interested in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a great place to be. It's a great place to be right now. When we see global downturn, in fact, in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco is maintaining production levels and I think even ramping up a little bit. Now, since we have folks from Aramco here, they can yell at me if I'm incorrect on some of their statements because we're viewing this from the outside. The purpose of the U.S. consulate in Dhahran from our history 70 years ago was to work together with Aramco. In fact, our first consulate building is actually still on the Aramco main camp. And we shortly moved a little further away, but we've always been there to support American oil interests, and we've always had an amazing partnership with Aramco, and I think we continue to have one even to this day. In fact, in Dhahran, Dammam, Al Khobar, in the Tri-City area in the Eastern Province, we have over 20,000 Americans still living and working there, so we have a great connection now on the ground in Saudi Arabia, and it's a great place to be, especially in these tough times. Now, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is interesting in that it's the only country in the Middle East that's a member of the G20, the largest 20 economies in the world. It's the 9th largest trading partner for the United States, with bilateral trade of $71 billion, and also the 19th largest destination for U.S. exports. And we export lots of things, including oil services and equipment, and a number of other products, especially on the higher end, like airplanes, machinery. In 2014, U.S. exports to Saudi Arabia exceeded $19 billion, and we keep increasing year on year, which is great to see. It's a relationship that keeps growing every year. And the economy continues on a healthy pace with real GDP growth at 3.8% and low inflation. Oil revenues from Saudi Aramco, unsurprisingly, accounted for about 85% of the total Saudi Arabian government's count receipts and 86% of total export revenue. The Saudi Arabian government continues to spend on infrastructure. They continue to spend on social programs, health, wellness, welfare, to improve the country, to continue to build and grow the country. It's a very young population in Saudi Arabia. Over half of the population is under the age of 30, which is an incredible and dynamic youth bulge. But of course, to do that, to service a population like that, you've also got to create jobs and create opportunities too. So Saudi Arabian government is working very hard to create more and more jobs, to employ these Saudi youth and to give them jobs for the next generation. So unsurprisingly, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia maintained its world-leading conventional reserves. 260.1 is the number that we have. We hope that's right. And the government, the Aramco also continues to expand oil field and services and to enhance production. 4 new fields and a new gas field were discovered, and maximum sustainable crude production, I think it's actually higher than that, but we like to be conservative. I think it's closer to 9.7 million barrels per day. In 2014, Saudi Aramco produced over 9.5 million barrels per day and 12.4 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas. The company continues to export large numbers, and I don't mean to read it, but it's important to run through these numbers because I think for those of you in the industry, you can see just the absolute massive volumes. In 2014, they put the finishing touches on the largest capital program in history, continuing to raise production, and Saudi Aramco is one of the unique companies in that Saudi Arabia as a country still is able to have that excess between what they produce, so not even producing at full volume. They could produce potentially more and raise and lower that. So that's unique in the world. Presently, the company has 12 upstream and downstream investment projects valued at over $80 billion. By 2020, the daily production could go up to 12.5 million barrels per day. And one of the key drivers, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is gas production. Now, Saudi Arabia has tremendous oil fields with incredible pressure, and this is what makes the industry so robust. But on the gas side, I think where the real opportunities are going to lie is in continuing to grow gas production and utilize unconventionals. And unconventionals is a key word. I'll mention this several times. Saudi Arabia's unconventional production is set to grow in places where I think we haven't seen this before. And this is a great opportunity for those of you, especially in the unconventional side, because as far as I know, most of the other potential fracs globally have had mixed or negative successes, like in Poland and Australia. But Saudi remains a very large area of potential for the unconventional. So I talked a little bit about gas development, and I think this is a great key area for the expansion. The company's targeting a 30% increase in sales gas output, moving towards different fields, increasing their infrastructure on these fields. The Wasset program will continue to extract more and more gas, and moving into some of the offshore fields in Arabia and Hasba. So in the future, the company is looking to expand at least by $140 billion in new projects, and that's both upstream and downstream. And looking at new investment for gas and oil plants, meeting the country's energy demand. Saudi Arabia, of course, having a young and growing population, continues to expand its electricity. In fact, we've recently hit a peak for electrical demand in Saudi Arabia, and that is mostly fed by oil, but now moving towards gas. Now, it's a long list of products being sought, and I think everyone in this room will have one of these products in their lineup. I include this slide in there because I think you can see from here that the level and interest and really potential for business is massive. In fact, it's really everything is needed and everything can be used in Saudi Arabia. Now, I talked a little bit about the trend of fracking and the move towards fracking, and I think it's an important one to talk about. The kingdom, from what we view on the outside, is looking at an internal fracking revolution. Aramco is looking at, and has announced plans to invest over $8 billion in enhancing the capacity for fracks, for unconventional shale drilling. And according to the Times, proposed trends in fracking would more than double from what they had previously planned. Now, we see this as incredibly important because, for those of you in the room, as you know, the U.S. has really been a pioneer in these sorts of technologies, and for those of you in the industry, I'm sure you would say that every frac is different, right? Every frac is unique in the way you drill it and the way you process it. And in Saudi Arabia, I think the potential for really having cutting-edge technology and utilizing cutting-edge technology, I think, is greater there than anywhere else. It's also important to note that one of the things that makes fracking so possible in a lot of the world is ample water resources. And of course, those are not available in a lot of the places where the fracturing is happening. And so new technologies for water usage, including environmental and remediation services, I think are crucial. Now, when we talk about importing into the market, Saudi Arabia is a member of the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council Customs Union, and the GCC is looking at standardizing along the 6 member countries for imports with conformity assessments. However, at this current time, each country really applies their own standards. The government is working on a certificate of conformity for all goods sent to Saudi Arabia, and creating requirements on products exported, including industrial standards and conformity assessments. And I think this is something that you can talk to your customs broker and freight forwarder about. The interesting thing that's happening in the customs realm in Saudi Arabia is sort of an e-customs process. And so what we're seeing is really incredible advances in the technology on customs and products entering the kingdom, but part of that is an electronic registration, which any company looking to export would have to go through. So I'm not going to go through this part because we have the expert on Aramco procurement and supply. We do put this into our presentations for the most part because this is the crucial step, right? Qualifying through Aramco is the crucial step. But there's a second part of it that I want to talk a little bit about that's not on the slides, and I think that's why I would love you to go and take a look at the brochure in the back of the room for our delegation. Now, why are we bringing delegations to these shows? Well, quite frankly, it's to increase business between the US and Saudi Arabia, and it's to help you potentially find a Saudi partner or representative. And this is key, and this is what we do. This is my job. This is my primary job, is to find you qualified Saudi companies that can work with you and make your product really a success. And the key in Saudi Arabia, as I think anyone who's worked there will tell you, is finding the right partner. So just like any good marriage, you have to have a partner that is open and honest. You have to have communication. And one of the things that we can do from my side in the consulate, and I'll leave my card up here, one of the things that we can do for you is find you a partner to enter the market, because I will tell you it is absolutely crucial for you to have the right partner and a good partner from the start. And the reason for that is simple. In Saudi Arabia, business law is sort of in a nascent process, okay? While the country is looking at ways to reform corporate law, it is not developed in the same standard way that we see around the world. And so if you initially chose a partner who might not be the best fit for you, it is very, very difficult to extricate yourself from that relationship. And so you want to do your best to find the right partner initially, which will save you lots of time and lots of money. Now, in my job, one of the things that we do is go through what we call a gold key process, and anybody can talk to me after that, but essentially that's matchmaking, where you come to Saudi Arabia, we bring you into the kingdom, we help you find companies, we actually will line them up in a slate like speed dating. So we call it, speed dating for businesses. And so, led by Ishtiaq in my office, what we'll do is we'll find qualified partners for you, and we'll let you choose at the end of the day who is the best fit for you. And then after that process, we can also assist you with the due diligence process, which looks at the company's reputation, the financials, all the things that you want to know about your potential mate before you go into the kingdom. But I cannot stress the importance of having a partner. Now, for me, it's my third time in Saudi Arabia. So I've spent almost all of my diplomatic career in one country. And there's a reason for that. Saudi Arabia is one of the most unique places in the world to do business because it is one of the few countries in the world, and maybe the only country in the world, that has the right kind of nexus between development and capital. Meaning, the country is still in need of certain things to develop. But the country also has the ability to pay for those things which they need. Now, my last tour was in Indonesia, and Indonesia is a great example of a country that has a lot of needs, but very few resources. Saudi Arabia is different. So in my third tour in Dhahran, in the oil capital, one of the things that I found that is most unique about Dhahran is the culture. Because of Saudi Aramco, and because of the more than 70 years of partnership between the US and Saudi Arabia, Dhahran, Dammam, Al Khobar, the eastern province, has a business culture unlike anywhere else in Saudi Arabia. You will find that the American influence has left a real imprint on the people. And so this is what makes it such a pleasure to work with these companies, these Saudi companies who could be your potential agents and partners. And some of them are around the room. Thankfully, some of them are listening to my presentation and saying, well, I wish he would mention something else than what he's talking about. But I encourage you to again, to take a look at that brochure and find some of the folks in here, because what we offer, in addition to this speed dating, this matchmaking when you come and visit Saudi Arabia, is we also offer trade show delegations. So instead of you having to go to Dhahran, Dammam, Al Khobar, you can come and meet people here at the show at LAGCO. So we've brought, I think in the end, 16? Is that the correct number? We brought 16 companies here, Saudi companies, who are very much looking forward to work with American companies in their business and looking forward to being your partners. We also send a delegation to OTC every year, and we will be, in 2 weeks, we'll all be at ADIPEC. So if you have more questions about jumping into the Saudi market, finding a partner, where to go, what to do, we'll be at ADIPEC after that. Now, Scott, if I can ask you, if you want to either sit down or stand, but one of the things when I was asked to be a speaker, I said, well, you understand that, as a diplomat, naturally I'm going to talk about the big picture stuff. And they said, Jesse, that's great, and we're glad you're coming, but we need somebody who actually works on the ground instead of somebody who watches. And Scott is not only a good friend of mine, he's also my neighbor in my compound. And when he told me that he was coming, I thought he'd be a perfect choice. Scott, you have 9 years of experience in the kingdom.
This trip, yeah, this trip.
Managing at different levels. And if you could you tell a few words to the folks about your experience, what life is like and what business is like in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, it's on. Can you hear me? First of all, a lot of good information that you presented. And you gave a real good picture of the reality of life in Saudi. I came to Saudi the first time. First of all, let me repeat. I work for a partnership, a joint venture between Weatherford International and Al Rasheed Petroleum Investments in Al Khobar. And as a much younger man with a lot more hair, I came to Saudi Arabia in 1982. Working for Weatherford Al Rasheed. And I remain with Weatherford. Well, I left for a short time, then I came back. Anyway, just celebrated my 30th anniversary. And I came back to Saudi Arabia in 2006 and had the wife, the children with me. And I have to say, like Jesse says, he's my neighbor. He has a wife and 2 incredibly beautiful, how old are they, 2?
3.
3-year-old twins. We live as normal a life as we could live anywhere. Stop me if I say too much, okay?
It's important to note.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to come. I want everybody to understand doing business in Saudi Arabia would be one of the smartest things you could ever want to do. And as far as living there, your personnel, with family, without family, rotating, non-rotating, I'm very grateful to be there. Every morning I wake up and I drive to work and I think, how lucky am I to still be here after all these years? I don't know how else to say it. And then working with a company like Aramco. What can I say about Aramco? I see these gentlemen here. I got to tell you, I've worked in Houston, I've worked in Corpus Christi, I was a product line manager over West Africa for Weatherford, so I've been to all these countries. I was in Europe, I was in Dubai, region office. But Saudi, you see I've been there 9 years, there's a reason for that, because I'm very happy there. I'm very, very happy there. Normal life, the kids went to school, graduated high school. Now you're raising your kids there. Mm-hmm. But working for Aramco, the most professional company, the highest standards that I have ever encountered. The most challenging, but also the most rewarding. If you enter into an agreement with Saudi Aramco, you will never regret. But I must say, when I say professional, they expect the same from you. I see some people nodding their heads. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I'm sure. They are trusting you to be a supplier, and they expect basically perfection from you. They're paying you for a service or for a product. You got to give them what they're paying for. You do that, and you're going to be smiling every day. Guaranteed.
If you don't do that, you might be crying.
Well, they're the customer, right?
Absolutely.
They have a right to expect you to get what they're paying for. But he's right. We all make mistakes. There's human error, there's equipment failure, a lot of different scenarios. It is the oil field. Some things are uncontrollable. You know that, I know that. But you need to have your ducks in a row, okay? What more can I say? I need to stress that. But I guarantee you, you go in there with the right attitude and level of professionalism, best thing you ever did, guarantee you. And I hope I can retire, stay there long enough to retire. It's that good.
Thank you, Scott. And I think one of the things that I want to reinforce is Scott made a great point about family life in Saudi Arabia. I'm sure the question that a lot of people have when they're thinking about Saudi Arabia, first of all, we can talk about the business environment, and I'll move to family life, but I'm sure you've got questions about the business environment. Let me tell you this about the business environment in Saudi Arabia. In my diplomatic career, I've worked in some fairly difficult places. Indonesia keeps coming to mind because unfortunately, corruption in that country is really endemic. And when people said, okay, you're going back to Saudi Arabia, they asked me about this corruption. And I said, I need to tell you honestly that I think in large part because of the culture of Aramco, the idea of this corruption under the table attitude is really absent from everything that I see in Saudi Arabia. So obviously the necessity to do your due diligence, to cooperate with the FCPA is important, but I will tell you it is a very open and transparent business environment. In fact, one of the most open and transparent business environments that I've ever seen. So I want you to know that. I want you to hear it from me. Family life. Obviously, one of the things you hear about, you think about when you think about doing business in the Middle East is you think about the risk. And certainly there is risk there. Obviously, as you hear in the news, there are active elements in Saudi Arabia that do target Westerners. This is a fact. I will tell you, though, I feel safer in Saudi Arabia than I do in the United States many times because in Saudi Arabia, the idea of sort of petty crime is largely absent. And that's really important to realize because the sort of petty crime, street crime that occurs in so many countries around the world, that unfortunately is where you often find the most risk. Countries that have different levels of threat from terrorism. Terrorism, if you look at the numbers, in fact, it's a very small percentage that it will affect you. Petty crime, street crime that you see in South Africa or Nicaragua. Unfortunately, that's the kind of crime that really does affect you on an everyday basis. So it's safe. The country is actively combating radical elements, so there is definitely a real motivation and movement by the country to handle those elements and take care of that. So on the risk aspect, honestly, I feel often safer in Saudi Arabia than I did this last weekend when I visited New Orleans, so you can understand that. Obviously, it's more useful for you to sort of ask your questions to us because it's the dialogue that you get the most out of. So I feel like I've covered to an effective level some of the high-level concepts on the strategic procurement side of working with Aramco. I don't even want to try to delve into that since I know there's going to be a whole program following this. But I do want to open the floor to questions about Saudi Arabia. It can be from the business environment to living and working there. It can be about the country in general. It can be about working every day in the oil field in Saudi Arabia. It can be about partnering up and finding partners. So please, folks, if you have questions about living, working, doing business in the kingdom, please go ahead, and cultural considerations, please ask away.
Wow.
Sir.
How long should the process take from initialization to getting over here working?
How
long should the process start?
Mm-hmm.
Beginning of the processing, trying to get approved to work over there and everything? How long should it take to getting over there?
Ishtiaq.
You're talking about getting approved with Aramco and then getting the first order. You know, this is a little bit lengthy process working with Aramco. As you know, Aramco is a large organization, and it takes some time to get under the approval process and getting approved with Aramco. I'm say we have Mr. Saleh Romeo from Aramco here. He will definitely talk about that. But in my opinion, you should keep at least an year, actually. Yeah, I think that's a fair amount, I would say. It can be a little less or it can be a little more, but approximately that time.
You mentioned that you guys do a lot of equipment transfer from U.S. to Saudi Arabia. Some of us, the equipment that we have is actually our skills.
Right.
Like an employment job. Is there a company that we can contact that deals with Saudi Arabia straight, or is it just?
So do you want to take this or do you want me to take this?
If you want to work for Aramco, I would recommend you just check Aramco. I don't want to speak for Aramco, obviously, but the website, you have an employment, there's a link on the Aramco, Saudi Aramco website for employment.
And Aramco regularly holds open enrollment employment throughout the year, if this is correct. And they're also, they had a great booth at OTC, and they have a booth here where you can talk to Aramco folks. You may have passed the Aramco booth on your way to the hall. Over here, it's in the corner. And I imagine you'll be at ADIPEC as well. Now, as far as just general employment in Saudi Arabia, I mean, obviously, you usually are working under a company, and then that company transfers you to Saudi Arabia. I would say now is sort of a unique time vis-a-vis a year ago, right, or 2 years ago. One of my friends, who's the head of business development for a large, one of the largest oil services companies, says to me, he says, 2 years ago, I couldn't get anyone to come to Saudi Arabia, and now I can't stop them from asking me to come over to Saudi Arabia. So obviously it's part of the cycle. But for the most part, you know, you're working under someone. I don't know any aggregators of services to just apply to outside of Aramco.
I have a similar question.
Please.
For a company who is a service provider,
Mm-hmm.
would they typically bring their entire workforce there, or are there any kind of requirements about hiring certain percentage of local employees? And
Definitely.
what kind of workforce is available?
Mm-hmm. It's that, Scott, do you want to try that one?
Well, yeah, that's a big one right there. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a
Yeah.
very, very good question. Obviously, myself, I have to continuously remind well, I don't have to remind myself, I think this way now. Saudization. That is probably one of the most important subjects you have to keep in your head. As he mentioned in his statements a few minutes ago, how much, 80% of the population is under 30?
50%, a little more. So.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
These are a lot of young men that need jobs, okay? Now, a large portion of them are very well educated, college degrees.
Mm-hmm.
A large portion of them are not. So if you have some entry-level positions, that's a perfect way to bring some young men in and give them a chance, give them an opportunity, you know? And this is very much smiled upon by Saudi Aramco when they're considering awarding contracts, or, you know. In fact, it's a requirement now, and has been for several years now. Every year they increase the level of Saudization that you have to meet, okay? You need to keep that in your mind. Now, what was, you're talking about bringing a workforce over to Saudi?
The question really was, is there workforce available there? Can you bring key personnel and expect them to hire?
That is really the best way to do it. With I think the intent ultimately to be to have your key people come in and train the local people for a number of years or whatever it requires, you know. And then you always got to remember you got to give your Saudi guys a career path to bring them up, you know. And
Some sort of an agency that would help connect you with qualified employees.
I'm sure there is. See,
It really depends. I think you're saying I'm a services company. I have people who provide services, and their skill, of course, is or their product is their skill, right? What they're good at and what they do. Now, services companies handle the Saudi market in a number of different ways. Many of them are working under an agent and representative, and they'll go in together on bidding on contracts, and then the division of labor will be different depending on the job, on the requirements. Obviously, working with your local partner, this is kind of the key. So you imagine yourself as a services company going into Saudi Arabia. Your partner would say, you should be bringing X amount of people in for the job. Part of what the partner will do is find not only local Saudis to work. And this is again part of that partnership, right? They'll also find other potential third country nationals depending on what you need. The key really is the local partner, right? Because if you imagine it in this way, it's not just, I mean, going to work in Saudi Arabia is not just about doing the work. It's also about the human resources. It's also about, as you've asked about, it's also about a whole number of things from getting paid to dealing with legal requirements and regulations. And this is why I stress a number of times, and I'll continue to stress, your local partner is your best friend and your best asset. If it's a good partner, you will be successful. If it is not a good partner, it could cause you years of headache. And so a lot of the smaller logistical or human resource items really get finished out by your partner, okay? So it's not, the worst thing to imagine would be that you're going to Saudi Arabia alone, right? And you don't necessarily know the language, you don't know the legal system, you don't know the requirements, right? Going alone is probably the worst thing you could imagine. And even the largest oil services or oil product companies, even the largest companies have their own agents, reps, local partners. It's necessary. You cannot do it without it for all the reasons we just talked about. Because, Scott will say, well, I don't know, are there companies that do that? And the reason we're asking ourselves that is because generally it is the local partner who's doing a lot of that under the table work, right? I mean, they're doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that really makes the operation run. You're bringing your expertise, you're bringing your people. That's valuable. And you're working together with that partner to make the rest of that package work, okay? So you wouldn't be expected, nor would you want to try and do it alone. That's key.
there are also university programs in Saudi with the major universities where they provide interns, or we call them interns. It's an intern program where you get graduates that'll come in and do a year with you, and you can mentor them, you can train them, and hopefully they'll want to go to work for you at the end of that, and the government will subsidize that.
Mm-hmm. Can't imagine that's all the questions we have. It's an interesting country.
Here we go.
Back, and then I'll get you down in the front. Sir, please.
With the, you mentioned having a partner. So
Yes.
as far as having a partner, well, I guess what kind of fees are typically involved with that, and what length of time is expected for that? It was mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
approximately like a year plus.
Right. So let me ask the question back to you and see if I'm getting it right. You're asking not only, about the time frame for a local partner, because that's different and divided from the time frame for pre-qualification for Aramco. These are two different items. The other question about the partner was fees, a fee structure, okay? The fee structure really varies. The variance that you'll work with, it really depends on the margin in what you're doing. Every tool or rental item or service contract, they'll all have different variances. Ishtiaq, I think, what are you seeing for normal fees on the agent? It's
7, 6, 7, 8%, depending
yeah.
on you.
And again, I'm saying that varies because that might be a baseline, but I've seen it much lower, and I really haven't seen it a lot higher. Saudi Arabia really is changing in the way we see the partner agent relationship. I mean, years ago, and Scott and I were just talking about this in the car, years ago, what you would see is a very traditional agent, and they have their name on it, right? And they're helping you through the process, but they may just be a phone, you know, a phone call, or an extra, you know, somebody extra to help. It wasn't a dynamic process. That's really no longer the case. We're seeing a real evolution in local agents and partners in Saudi Arabia to where the companies that are successful are young and hungry, and it's a true partnership, not someone just representing you and tacking a fee on it. It is someone who's working with you, who's putting money in. And one thing I have to mention is that because of Saudization and localization, which is a buzzword you see throughout the industry, and certainly you'll see it in almost every country, because of that necessity, what we're seeing more and more of are local partners that are investing with you on a different split, right? So they're investing with you on projects, they're creating local content, they're doing local fabrication of some parts of the equipment. So you're not seeing the traditional old school partner, yeah, I'm in name only. No, you're really seeing true joint ventures where fees are shared, money is shared, costs are shared, and really the victories are shared too. So it really has changed from, I think, a traditional model. So the fee structure idea, and the reason why I say it's a true variance, is because if it's your real partner, right, and you're actually working together on projects, then you're sharing costs, and it's not so much of just I'll tack this on top. It's actually we're working together, and so it's a dynamic, not so much of a fee structure, but really a dynamic working relationship, saying I'll take this part of the risk, you take that part of the risk. And that's the change, I think, we've seen in the kingdom, a real change from what it was 10 or 20 years ago. Scott, you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I say, I work for a joint venture.
Yeah.
In 1979, Weatherford wanted to come and do business in Saudi Arabia. At that time, you had to have a full partner. And that's what was entered into, an agreement between Weatherford and Sheikh Abdullah Al Rashid. And here we are, 34 years later, 35 years later, still going strong, better than ever, getting better every year.
In fact, he's probably much more invested now than he was 34 years ago at the start of the project, right? Which is, again, that's the evolution. So I think in many ways the traditional agent structure has fallen away for much more of a joint venture partnership where you're working together, because the understanding is it should really be for mutual benefit. So that's totally changed. Don.
Okay. Yeah. Full transparency, I'm put here as a plant to
Sure, of course.
Just wrapping my brain under more questions. And when you talk about universities, it did make me think about something. I was curious if there's collaborations with the oil industry and the non-traditional or the alternative energy, such as concentrated solar. The university here has a partnership, and they have a concentrated solar field south of Louisiana, and it's basically a test bed. And anyhow, with Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking, man,
There's a tremendous amount of sun. I thank God for it every day.
So I'm just curious if the universities were working on that, working.
That's a really good question, and I don't know. I'm sorry.
So I can tell.
I will follow up.
I can tell you the answer to that, absolutely. When President Obama met with King Salman about a month ago, a little bit over a month ago, or 2 months ago now, they talked about a very comprehensive partnership between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And one of the key things that they were talking about, of course, is education. You may know, or you may not know, that the King Abdullah Scholarship Program sent on a yearly basis more than 55,000 Saudi students to the United States to study. This is an incredible number. No other nation except for India and China even come close to those numbers, and that's because they have a billion and a half people. Saudi Arabia has about 30 million people, and they're sending almost as much as India and China. So that's an amazing amount of Saudi students in the U.S. University collaborations are happening at all levels in Saudi Arabia. One of the most important ones that we see in Dhahran is with MIT and KFUPM, which is the leading university in Saudi Arabia, King Fahd University for Petroleum and Minerals. And it's the MIT KFUPM Center for Clean Water and Clean Energy. I mean, who doesn't want clean water and clean energy? And they regularly do research together, publish papers together. I had some great conversations with folks from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, ULL, to talk about potential collaborations. I think we saw 22 Saudi students. Is that the correct number? 12? Okay, so we had the great benefit. I hope some of you were able to come on Monday. We had a very nice ceremony with the mayor and our Saudi delegation, and we had those Saudi students there. And the delegates, I mean, the companies from Saudi Arabia, they said having those students there was one of the best things about that reception, because they felt so confident in the future to have these students trained at great American universities, and vice versa, to bring, our aim is to bring more American students to Saudi Arabia, because obviously the closer we work together, I mean, this is a partnership that has spanned 70 plus years. The more we work together, obviously it's better for both of us on a cultural level, but certainly on a business level. And one of the things that I always note is that in Saudi Arabia, over 75% of the Majlis al-Shura, which is equivalent to the Congress, was educated in the US. And so I say to Americans, could you imagine if 75% of our Congress were schooled in Saudi Arabia? That effect, right? So that tie, that closeness. And we always say thank you to Saudi Arabia for giving us the privilege of sending their kids over. I mean, we hopefully are taking care of them, right? And that's a real privilege to have students in our country, to have people and host them. So, but there are a lot of synergies, a lot of university projects happening right now. Sir?
I represent an equipment manufacturing company.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we can recognize your large service companies like your Halliburton, your Schlumberger,
Yep.
In the United States, there's a lot of, as we call them, mom and pop service companies.
Absolutely.
Does that exist in Saudi Arabia? And if so,
Mhm.
how would we help identify so we could possibly provide them our services?
So here's the interesting thing. In fact, this is the reason that we chose LAGCO. We always say to each other that LAGCO is known as the working man's oil show. And OTC is very much, the biggest and the brightest and the best. LAGCO, and this is my second time coming here. It's been 6 years since I came here last. LAGCO is such a different show because it really has that mom and pop, that small business appeal. For Saudi Arabia, this is a perfect match. Most of the Saudi companies are family owned, okay? So it makes total sense to them to work with the smaller service companies, the family owned companies. And the reason for that is power distance, right? If you go to OTC, if you're a Saudi company looking to do business with an American company, you go to OTC and you talk to the person at the booth who has to talk to their manager, who has to talk to the regional manager. You never know when you're going to get somebody that can actually make a decision, but when you're working with small companies, the decision maker is there. They're man in the booth. That doesn't exist in the same way in Saudi Arabia where you have those companies. What you have are a lot of larger family-owned companies, very reputable, who take service companies underneath them as agents, and then you're doing your work in tandem with Saudi companies, both the ones in the delegation, and if you have questions about it, you can talk to us about potentially going to Saudi Arabia and actually meeting with these companies.
Are those service companies Saudi Arabian?
They are Saudi companies that will have a suite of service providers under them.
Us, for instance, we don't provide service, we provide the equipment.
It's exactly the same. In that case, it's a more of a straight agent where you're working with a Saudi company, and most of the companies we work with are larger. The reason that they're larger is simply because as a representative of the U.S. government, it certainly would not be a good thing for me to recommend, you for a small company that doesn't have the FCPA, the due diligence, the whole host of things. We have to work with companies that have a good reputation. And these happen to be companies that are just a little bit larger. In the future, we would love to work with more small and mediums in Saudi. It's a growth process. It's happening now. The government of Saudi Arabia is encouraging it, but the companies that we would introduce you to are probably of a larger size. And the reason is because reputational aspects, financial, right, all the things, we have to find the right partner for you. On the equipment side, it's exactly the same. Right. Sir?
If there are guys in and out of the country, is there a special visa or LOIs needed?
Yeah, the process would be, just like you say, LOI, letter of invitation, and the visa would have to be processed in the U.S. at the Saudi embassy
Or consulate.
or consulate.
There's a consulate in Houston.
Houston, yeah.
The consul general in Houston is a fantastic guy. He's always been very open with us, and from our side, unfortunately, as the U.S. consulate or U.S. embassy, we're no longer able to do that sponsoring portion, but we do have companies that we work with on the travel agent side who can help those visas. And one of the real triumphs on my first tour in Saudi Arabia was the issuance of reciprocity on 5-year visas, meaning 5-year multiple entry in and out on both sides. That was a huge victory. And so when you're applying for a business visa, you can get a 5-year multiple entry, which is really huge. I mean, I don't think we could overestimate what that did to our relationship.
Really huge, really huge.
And we were doing 1-year single entries, things like that. Students were having to come back. It was terrible. I mean, I remember every meeting they would say, "What about the visa?" So we fixed that, alhamdulillah. And so the quick answer is LOI, Saudi consulate. There's a Saudi consulate in New York, in Los Angeles, in Houston, and the Saudi embassies in Washington, D.C. And if you have any problems or any questions, I have a great relationship with my counterpart, who's the commercial consul, Adil Mubarak in Washington, D.C., and we can help you out with that. Sir?
Working in facilities in Saudi Arabia, are there background checks and training courses that you have to complete prior to entering those facilities, and can you do that from the United States?
Background checks into entering facilities.
I think there are background checks, but you
Secretary of Safety Council certification or some type of safety program for that facility?
I haven't heard of something like that. I mean, I think the expectation is when you're going over there, you're going to have, as a professional, you're going to have certain levels of certification, and those would usually be trained by the company. I have not heard of any other.
Well, Aramco has requirements, of course, for land as well as offshore that you have to meet. You have to take the proper courses and be certified, qualified. Card carrying, you're not going to be allowed to board a chopper if you don't have the proper certifications on you, provided, and that's Saudi Arabia credentials. I wouldn't even try it, no. It needs to be recognized by Saudi Aramco. I don't mean to speak for Saudi Aramco,
No.
again, I don't, but just from personal experience, make sure you just do it the right way, that's all. But you'll be informed if you come to Saudi, you'll know what to do. You'll be
Right.
told what to do.
Right.
The question is, what are the credentials for the imposed by the companies for the U.S. as compared to the Saudi companies? So are the credentials being the same or are they different or easy on that credentials for a particular trading course?
Credentials, and I mean credentials. The thing about working with Aramco and then all the companies that cascade down from that, there are obviously a number of industry recognized credentials that people have. Almost everyone's an SPE member if they're on that side of it, or association members. All of the U.S. associations that you have for different parts of the industry, those are all active in Saudi Arabia. So I think. As Scott said, and I want to reiterate, Aramco is an incredibly professional company, and so you have to be a professional to work with them, and that means using industry standard credentials and industry recognized credentials. So what the baseline is in the U.S., it'll be that usually plus something else. So that'll be the baseline, and then there will be standards above that to meet. we're coming near to our time, but I really am happy to take any other questions. If you don't want to ask it in front of the room, or if you have more questions about business, either finding a partner, matchmaking, or just what it's like to live in Saudi Arabia, I myself will be available on, sir.
You were talking about the partnership with the agent, how it's becoming more of a joint venture.
Yes, absolutely.
At what point does it change the status of the joint venture that it becomes an in-kingdom Saudi company? Does it get preferential treatment when it gets to that point?
It really depends. It really is a it depends question. That's a very open-ended. There's a very open-ended answer to that question, which is, at what point does it become a Saudi company? Well, it definitely is initially a Saudi company, absolutely, because you're working under an agent, and you can structure the ownership or the risk or however you want to do it. There are a number of different ways to do that, and that really just depends on the relationship you have and what you're comfortable with. Some companies want to absorb most of the risk, and in that case, that's more of the traditional sort of agent representative, where you as a U.S. company are taking a lot of the risk and you're also putting a lot of the money in. But it's as frequent that we see it where you develop those terms based on what you need. So there are certainly a number of examples, and I think this is a newer phenomenon where you're finding the U.S. company and the Saudi company creating a third company, which is even different than a straight JV. It's become something more, something else, where it's neither on the bank sheet, the balance sheets of the Saudi company or of the U.S. company, where you're creating an in-country new company under whichever legal or financial instruments that you want to measure it. So that's becoming, I think, more popular, where you have both the Saudi and the U.S. name on that new entity, and you're doing business under that entity. But really, again, it's an it depends question. I mean, equipment providers, manufacturers, they're going to have a different relationship with their partner than service providers are for the nature of that business, right?
Thank you for this presentation, but on behalf of the university, I just wanted to mention that we have 60 Saudi students studying on our campus.
60.
Wow.
That's a great number.
And most of them are studying petroleum engineering, but we have
Of course.
chemical engineers. We also have business majors.
Yes.
So for businesses that are interested in going to Saudi Arabia, you talk about Saudization.
Yes, Saudization, not the club. Yeah.
And so, I'm open to, I think the university is open to, any of your companies that are interested in any type of internships to arm with our Saudi students who will return to Saudi.
That's great. That's really great.
Great opportunity for them to work together with the students. And I take care of all the students, international students on campus, so talk to me.
I wouldn't mind meeting some of these guys.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I really highly encourage any companies looking towards Saudi Arabia, especially if you're located in the Lafayette area, to take advantage of meeting with Saudi students, because they will give you a much better idea of what it's like to live and to work in the kingdom than I ever could. But more than that, they're going to bring their own knowledge, understanding, and benefit when it comes to Saudi Aramco, because since Saudization is the key, and that is the word, bringing in Saudis to work with you, young Saudis, in your company, helping you to understand the dynamics, the business relationship. I think it's amazing. Thank you very much for that. 60 students at ULL. And this is all across the country, it's like that. So it's a really amazing partnership. Any other questions before I go? By the way, I will, again, as I was saying, I will be seated in the back after this presentation, at the back of the Aramco presentation, which is going to be happening in the next room, in room B. So I'll be in the back. If you have any questions for me, again, about doing business, about living in Saudi Arabia, working in Saudi Arabia, feel free to ask away. I've had a tour in every major city. I served in the embassy in Riyadh. I served in the consulate in Jeddah, and now in the consulate in Dhahran. So I've covered the whole place. I can give you the on-the-ground knowledge. So let me thank quickly Ishtiaq Hussain, my senior specialist. Thank you, Ishtiaq.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Absolutely.
Very much.
Very
And
happy to be here.
on behalf of LAGCO, I do want to give you your speaker plaque.
Oh, wow.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you.
And Ishtiaq, for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, we remain here to serve. We're here to serve you. Ask us any questions. All right? Thanks.
Thank you.